Hi, I am Sam Burnett, and welcome to the very first episode of Transed. So this is a video series I am making that is about transgender things. It's about pronouns, it's about defining terms, it's about some medical stuff, it's about some history stuff, it's about some ally stuff. I'm going to be talking about all sorts of things in all the different episodes I'm going to be making. This series is meant to serve as a sort of educational resource to really anyone who needs or wants it. It's for friends and family of trans people. It's for people who have a classmate or a coworker who just came out. It's for trans people themselves and just really anybody who wants to know more about the community. Education on these topics is really important. Most of the harassment and the bullying and the discrimination and the lack of acceptance and tolerance that I see comes out of a place of ignorance. So much misinformation and myths and stereotypes are put out there in the media, and it causes people to create opinions and views about trans people that are uneducated. So by making this series where I do try to share true information about trans people from trans people, I hope to at least do a little bit to educate the community. For all of the episodes, down in the description, I will be having links to further resources and further information on everything that I talk about. So I encourage you to click on those links and go look into these things and research for yourself. Nobody is expecting you to know everything there is to know about trans people and about the trans community. But if you do want to learn, this series is here for you and further resources are there for you. So without further ado, let's get into the first episode. So let's start with the basics. What does transgender mean? Transgender is an adjective used to describe a person whose gender identity does not align with their assigned gender or their biological sex. So what does that mean? Because there's a lot going on in that definition. So assigned gender is the determined gender of a newborn at birth by a nurse or a physician or a midwife or whoever delivers the baby, and it's based off of biological sex. Basically meaning that when the baby is born, someone goes, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl," and writes it on the birth certificate, and that's basically that person's assigned gender. Gender identity is a bit more complex. It's a person's personal understanding of themselves. It's how they perceive their gender. So to say somebody is transgender is to mean that their gender identity is different than their sex that was assigned at birth. Now, for the majority of people, their assigned sex and their gender identity actually do line up. They're assigned female and they identify as female. They're assigned male and they identify as male, etc., etc. Those people are called cisgender, cis meaning to stay or the same. So for example, let's say somebody is born, and when they're born, the person delivering them says it's a boy, and they base that off the biological sex of this person. They write male on the birth certificate, they go home, everyone calls the baby he, understands this child as a boy from then on. But let's say that as this person grows up, they begin to realize that they don't feel like they are a boy. This child starts to feel as if they are a girl, and they begin to identify as a girl despite their assigned sex and their biological sex. This person is transgender. Now, to explain what it actually feels like to feel as if you are not what you were assigned is something I don't think I've ever been able to successfully explain to anybody. I was assigned female at birth, but I identify as a boy. And to explain how I knew that and to explain what that feels like is pretty much impossible. But the important part, if you're an ally, if you are a cisgender person who wants to support trans people, the important part isn't that you know what it's like or that you truly just understand how we feel. It's that you support us even if you don't know. So gender identity is not the same thing as gender expression. Gender identity is how you understand and perceive yourself. It's who you are. Gender expression is how somebody expresses their identity, whether it be through clothes or behavior or makeup. It's how you express yourself in terms of masculinity and femininity. And that's not the same thing as gender identity. A guy who presents feminine isn't necessarily transgender, and a girl who presents masculine isn't necessarily transgender. Your expression doesn't determine your identity. And there's a lot of transgender people whose gender expression doesn't necessarily match their gender identity. There are people who identify as male who present femininely, and there are people who identify as female who present masculine. They're related, but they're not the same. Gender identity is also not the same thing as sexual or romantic orientation. Somebody's sexual or romantic orientation is who they are attracted to, sexually or romantically. It has to do with the people that they want to be in certain types of relationships with. Some of these types of labels are gay and straight and bisexual and different things like that. But transgender is not one of these things, because transgender is who you are in terms of gender, not who you're attracted to in terms of gender. The acronym LGBT plus has things like LGB, lesbian, gay, and bisexual, along with T, transgender. And just because they are in the same acronym, it doesn't mean that they're all the same thing, or that they're all orientations, or they're all genders. It's all grouped together that way because transgender people and people of diverse sexualities have always had similar struggles and have been treated in similar ways by society. So the LGBT community was formed, even though they don't all refer to the same type of thing. Being transgender is not the same thing as cross-dressing. Cross-dressing is the act of adopting the clothes or the role of the opposite sex. This is something that's usually done for somebody's entertainment, or it's a hobby, or it's something along those lines. But somebody who cross-dresses is not transgender, because if a man wears women's clothing as a sort of hobby sort of thing, he doesn't identify as a woman, and vice versa. Transgender people are not just acting like a different gender or pretending to be or dressing like it. We are the gender that we say that we are. It is an identity. It is the truth. It's our personal truth. And it's hard to argue with people and really say, no, this is who I am, like I'm not what you say. It's hard because that's not something that you can necessarily prove. It's only something that you can just live by and hope that people respect. Being transgender is not the same thing as being a drag queen or a drag king. It's not drag. Drag is when somebody dresses up in the clothes and sort of like pretends to be a gender other than what they are, such as a man dressing up like a woman or a woman dressing up like a man. And this is usually done to entertain other people. There are drag shows and like performances and RuPaul's Drag Race and all these things. It's to entertain people. People who do drag usually exaggerate what they're doing, and they exaggerate these gender roles and these behaviors in order to entertain people. And that is not the same thing as being transgender. Now, to define some terms that you might hear a lot when talking about trans things. FTM and MTF. FTM means female to male, and MTF means male to female. This refers to different types of trans people. Somebody who is MTF was assigned male at birth and transitioned to female. Somebody who is FTM was assigned female at birth and transitioned to male. AFAB and AMAB. AFAB stands for assigned female at birth, and AMAB stands for assigned male at birth, which is pretty self-explanatory if you know what assigned sex is. Basically means that somebody who is AFAB was designated to be a female when they were born, and somebody who is AMAB was determined as a male when they were born. You can also see these written as DMAB and DFAB. Another term is non-binary. Non-binary is a term used for any sort of gender that falls outside of male or female. This relates to the whole concept of gender being a spectrum and not just two boxes. There are all sorts of different ways to identify, and it doesn't just have to be confined to male and female. I will have a later episode designated to this topic, so if you want to learn more, you can skip to that. I'm pretty sure it's episode 5. So trans man and trans woman. So these are often things that get confused, and people don't know if trans man refers to somebody who's FTM or MTF, and same with trans woman. A trans man is somebody who is AFAB and their gender identity is male. So this is a person that is FTM, female to male. A trans man is a man. They are not some fancy type of man or some fancy type of woman. They are not necessarily somebody in the middle. They are just a man. And trans is an adjective. It describes who they are, but it describes a man, a person who is male. It might sound a little bit redundant with this, but trust me, this concept is hard to get across to people and it can be hard to understand. But a trans man is a man. Trans is just a separate piece of who they are. And trans woman would be the opposite. This person was assigned a male at birth, but their gender identity is female. They are MTF, male to female, and this person is a woman. They identify as a woman. Trans is just an adjective, like I said before. They are not some fancy type of woman. They're not some fancy type of guy. They are just a woman, and trans just describes part of their identity as a woman. So that's all I have for this episode. Anyway, thank you for watching the very first episode of Trans Ed. I am so excited to finish making this series. I have been having a lot of fun planning and filming some other videos, and I really hope it turns out well. If you want to know more, keep watching my series. I will be talking about all sorts of things, and I will even be bringing some other people with different trans experiences than what I have, who will talk about what they've been through and their perspective on some things. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.